I have a project where I've got...
Live streaming is on.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another session in this Youth Summit. We'll speak about empowering and championing education in this session, and especially getting some expert advice on how to seek different work experiences as young people during this COVID uncertain times. We're joined by Mark, who's the CEO of COVID Tech Support, who spoke on some previous sessions as well today, and we're going to expand on some of those ideas about what can young people do in those uncertain times. I mean, myself, I work for a migrant rights organization called the 3 Million, and actually during the pandemic, we started running a youth network called the Young Europeans Network, that will have activities only taking place online to get young people more involved in discussions about migrants' rights, citizenship, and including opportunities to volunteer in this migrants' rights sector and increase the youth representation in the migrant sector. So myself and Mark come from different fields of work, but we share similar experience and similar views in how to involve young people in those uncertain times. So we had a few other panelists that were supposed to be with us today, but we had a few apologies. So I'm kind of taking the role. I mean, we're both taking the role of chair and interviewer at the same time. I don't want this to seem like I'm interviewing Mark, because I didn't prepare a list of questions, but I guess we'll just have a conversation. And if the other panelist, the third panelist, joins us a bit later, they can also participate in the conversation. But I thought it would be interesting just to start, maybe both of us, maybe Mark, I'll ask Mark, and I'll comment as well based on my own experience. What can young people do, like in this period? For example, if you're a young person, you're in university, your course is moved online, it's very difficult to get any kind of job, part-time job this summer until the end of summer, and also when you start your new year. What can you actually do to still make sure that you develop some transferable skills that will be actually useful in the job market when you graduate in a couple of years' time or next year? So I mean, I'll start with you, Mark, and you can just share your thoughts, and then I can comment based on my own experience as well.
Yeah, sounds great. And also just to introduce myself for anyone who wasn't in the session just now. I'm Mark, and I founded an organization called COVID Tech Support. It's a volunteer community of digital professionals who are helping charities and nonprofits with any digital and technical help that they need. This is particularly pressing during the coronavirus pandemic, because we have a situation where many of these services, their services are more vital now than ever, because they're supporting our communities, they're supporting people suffering from poverty and mental health problems and so on. And people are turning to them as things have been getting worse. But at the same time, many of these services have had their funding dry up, because we're now entering a recession, and also a lot of the traditional funding channels no longer exist. You think of marathons and sport events and so on. And on top of all that, many of these services, which used to be offered in person, can no longer be done in person because of quarantining problems. So many of these services have had to move line, they've had to go digital, and they just haven't been equipped for it. So COVID Tech Support was set up so that we could connect those services to people who had the skills to be able to get them back online. And one of the things I've found from building that community of people with digital skills is that it was very easy to build that community. There were a lot of people out there who, because of furloughing and because of unemployment, suddenly had the time on their hands to be able to help out, but didn't like the idea of sitting at home doing nothing for several months and having their skills go to waste, to not be improving all the time and to fall behind their peers who are still in work. And so feedback we often get from people who do end up volunteering with these services is that it's been a fantastic opportunity for them not just to keep their skills relevant, but actually to learn new skills. And often we send multiple volunteers to a single project, which gives people an opportunity to network, to work with each other, to learn from each other, and ultimately to come out of a period like furlough better equipped than going into it. And one thing we've started to see an increase of in the last month or two has been an influx of students, because naturally people were finishing their courses at university and looking many of them, there's summer placements were no longer going ahead and suddenly had a lot more time on their hands. And again, as all graduates and students are, they wanted to use their summer to learn as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to get experience. And so they, one thing we're seeing is that they're turning to communities like ours to find opportunities to use their skills and to learn stuff. And so we're putting them in touch with projects, and we've just started a mentorship scheme as well, where if you are someone who feels that you're inexperienced, we'll actually match you to a project with someone who's got more experience, and you can work together and hopefully learn from one another. But of course, I'm talking about that from COVID Tech Support's point of view, but there's actually many organizations that have sprung up in the last couple of months to address this problem of people who want to get experience and organizations, charities, and so on who need that experience. Another issue we're seeing, of course, is that employment options are getting thin on the ground, where a lot of work placements have gone away, a lot of low-level jobs have gone away. A lot of companies are being very protective now about hiring and trying to keep staff numbers stable or reducing staff numbers. So in terms of professional experience, there are just a lot less opportunities out there, and the few opportunities that there are out there are more competitive. But the message I had really to anyone who's maybe lost a work placement or was considering taking some kind of work placement and can't anymore is that there is actually more opportunity out there than you may realize. But it's that it may be that you have to volunteer rather than look for somewhere paid. And I know that can be difficult for a lot of people as well. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you are at home and you can't do any work and you want to get some experience, then I urge you to get out there and join a community. It doesn't have to be COVID Tech Support, especially if you're not technically minded. There are many others as well. To join one and find some opportunity. And even if you do 1 day a week, you're going to make a huge, huge difference to someone who needs that help, and you're going to learn a lot in the process as well.
Thanks, Mark. I was going to ask you actually, just out of curiosity, like what you mentioned that you have people volunteering, working on different projects. What kind of projects or types of organizations you support in this time? Like, if you can tell us more about that, please.
Absolutely. So just to give you a couple of projects we've completed recently, we did a project with Shelter, who are a homelessness charity in the UK. And at the beginning of the pandemic, they had an issue where they have these distribution warehouses full of goods for homeless people. And traditionally, people would come to the warehouse and take what they need, local shelters and things like that, and then go and be able to look after their local community. With quarantining, they couldn't do that anymore. So what they wanted to do, they came to us and they said, we don't really know how to fix this, but one idea we had was a kind of online web store for shelters to shop for goods. Obviously, everything would be free, but it would need to be secure. We'd need to make sure that only the shelters can actually go in here, and then we'd arrange delivery of these goods. So they came to us and said, this is just a half-baked idea right now, but is this something you guys could help with? And within a week, we were able to create a team of volunteers with a range of skills. We had some people who could make websites. We had some people who were project managers. Some people we had one guy who's had a business in creating web stores, and we found this guy who was willing to help. And within a week, they built a prototype web store that they were able to deliver to Shelter, and they immediately started using that to distribute goods to the local shelters in the area. And of course, this was right at the start of the pandemic as well. So this really unlocked a lot of the aid that suddenly, out of nowhere, they realized they weren't going to be able to get out. And we have a whole bunch of different stories like that. It's not always web-based either. It's not just about building websites and so on. We have we help a lot of projects with things like marketing and design, project management, and so on.
Yeah, I was reflecting on one of the other panels about work experience during studies and the importance of actually having some work experience before you finish your degree. And for example, my partner, we went together at the same university, and he's a software engineer. And one thing he observed during computer science course is that there was in some universities not so much opportunity to actually do work on an actual real project to apply your skills, and just do exams or like the various assessments and worksheets. And actually, when you go out in the real world of work, like having your first graduate developer role or something like that, and you're actually quite overwhelmed by the changes. And often the technology that is taught in some of the degrees is not the most up-to-date one as well. So it takes a bit of reskilling after the degree. So that's why I think it's actually, a project like yours or like other places doing tech-based projects are actually very good for anyone, especially working in STEM subjects, because even in math degrees, you do a bit of coding, and other degrees as well, is because you get that work experience that's actually using, up-to-date projects and technologies that you could use in the world of work after. So how do you think, like, those kind of, how can students actually use this, to bring it back to this student theme, how they can use this work experience to integrate this with their degree? I mean, do you have any examples of people who have used this already? Like, for example, in my role in the 3 Million, we ran different projects with young Europeans, and although there were some volunteer projects, one of them we ran it last year. It was not digital. Now it's digital after COVID, but some people did volunteer with us for a few weeks, for example, on a project, or did a very short work experience, and then they actually found part-time jobs in the sector, in the migration sector, in the charity sector, based on that experience. Often what people need is just this first experience, if it's a volunteer basis. I mean, in an ideal world, everything will be paid, but especially in the charity sector, the funding is especially limited in this period. So how do you think, what are the ways students can actually use this experience to get more opportunities after? If you have any examples of how that worked.
Yeah, it's a good question, and we haven't had any examples of cooperating with an academic institution for a work experience, but I think that's just because this service got set up from April onwards, which was towards the end of the academic year, and what we're seeing now are students coming out of their courses and looking for things to do over the summer. But I imagine this is the kind of thing that we may be able to find opportunities for as we get closer to September and October, when university starts up again, and actually we can intervene with the beginning of an academic year. One of the things I think has been interesting, though, is that not just that a service like ours is able to help you find work experience, whether you're a student or not, and we do get a lot of students applying to get experience through us, but also that the opportunities that we have are available to anybody, anywhere in the world. Most of our community are in the UK, but about 20-30% of our community are international, and we do have examples of things like, literally we have a volunteer in Tibet who's helping a local community in England with a project, and we have someone from Silicon Valley, an engineer there, who's helping on a project in Scotland, I think. So one of the things I think is really interesting about the world as it is right now is that whereas before opportunities were often geographic, it was about your ability to be able to move to where the opportunities were and to only be able to do things in your local area. Those, for as long as COVID is going to be around and we're quarantining and we're remote working, actually the world's kind of opened up to you, and also the number of opportunities has opened up to you as well if you look for them. And I'd be very interested, Alexandra, to hear your take on that, because obviously you've very much got the EU perspective, and we're in the process of closing our borders in the UK, but during a time when actually borders are becoming less relevant for things like this. So, I mean, how do you see remote working and technology being used for learning and for work being affected by Brexit and vice versa?
Yeah, I think, from what I heard, I actually saw some evidence submissions to the government on workers' rights and different aspects after Brexit. And I saw like quite a few of the big tech companies in the UK being quite concerned, not necessarily about recruitment, but retaining the workforce that's already in the UK. So people who are of EU migrants, EU citizens who are already in the UK, working in quite highly paid and competitive jobs in the tech industry, especially in the bigger companies. And I think the concern was not necessarily that we can't recruit, we can't fill in the jobs after Brexit, although this is a concern perhaps for especially more smaller and medium-sized businesses. But I noticed, and it was quite interesting for me to read that there was like one evidence submission, and it was like one of the big companies in the UK saying, well, we're actually concerned that people who work in our offices won't be attracted to stay in the UK anymore, and they will actually leave to go to other opportunities. And actually, I mean, we often say about, everything's like world leading if you look at the political discourse, but actually compared to 10-20 years ago, a lot of the industry, especially in Eastern Europe, developed massively. Like now, I mean, I'm from Romania originally, like in terms of tech industry, in terms of software engineers, there's like so much opportunity in Eastern Europe as well. So it's not so much the case as it was 20 years ago. And perhaps if you're very, very talented, like the UK was your like end, destination and the best pay you could get, actually compared to the quality of living and like the standard of living and the average cost of life, I would even say that especially for junior roles as a software engineer, for example, you actually get quite a better standard of living in Romania than in the UK. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I think if you're especially a young person, like in your first or second job, I think because they invested so much in that industry, I think you actually do get at the junior level like a better standard of living. I'm not sure how it is, obviously, if you're more senior, if you're in management, things look different. We're speaking about different kind of numbers and situations there. But I do worry about like the future of the tech industry after Brexit. I mean, there's always, people who are saying like, well, after Brexit, we won't have any more immigration. Well, no, because you always have to recruit, especially in those industries like tech, talent from abroad. If people won't come anymore from, say, France or Germany, you have to recruit from somewhere else, or you have to massively invest into training and actually, deliberately encourage people to go into those STEM routes much more than you do at the moment. So I would say, yes, I think especially in some of the hello, I think we're joined by by Matt there. Especially in those, I would say, like higher paid tech jobs, I think people have a lot of choice, especially young people, compared to, let's say, people who come. A lot of my friends who come from Eastern European countries who came here to work in the lower paid sector. So yes, I do worry about staff retention more than about future recruitment. I'm not sure what's your view on that, actually working in the industry, Mark.
Yeah, it's funny working in the tech industry and startups and so on. I have definitely seen a mass sort of migration away from the UK, in particular away from London during the pandemic. I know so many people, and I'm speaking about anecdotally, of course, but I have seen so many friends of mine and people I know and people I've worked with decide to leave the UK, move abroad. Many of them were EU citizens who moved here, and now they've moved back home with very little intention of moving back. So I think that if we move to a world where there's increased remote working, there is a risk of a brain drain, a post-Brexit brain drain, which the pandemic is only going to exaggerate. And it'll be very difficult, I think, to retain that. And who knows what economic consequences there will be for that. I know less about the non-technical parts of the jobs industry and the economy, and you might be better covered to talk about that. But before we talk about that, it'd be great to introduce Matt and sorry, I can't see who. Someone else has just come in there.
Natalie Bennett.
It'd be good then if you to by way of introducing yourselves, it'd be great for each of you to introduce yourselves and talk about your perspective on how people can be resilient in the face of coronavirus and beyond, and how they can safeguard their education and potential work prospects as well. So shall we start with you, Matt?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Natalie and I were having a grand old chat in another call, so we, I think, got the wrong link. But it's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Matt. I'm sitting in Sydney, Australia, some hour of the night, and I am, I suppose, here as the chair. I work in a youth organisation, UN Youth Australia, and we. I suppose maybe, I don't know if I'm representing here, is sort of non-traditional education forms and engaging young people in that NGO space. That's a big question that you've pitched on M3. COVID, I think, has certainly been a a huge test of resilience for everyone. I think that's a given, and across so many different layers as well. In, I suppose, our sector in particular, we rely solely on people coming together and doing peer-to-peer education and really getting those learning opportunities. And here in Australia, universities have certainly really suffered in terms of students not being able to go on campus. And a lot of those informal education opportunities, like internships, like placements, have also really just been cancelled if they can't move online. So I certainly do see a massive impact coming, not just now, but into the future. I think we tend not to place enough emphasis on those informal opportunities, or I suppose non-university degree opportunities, in terms of how that impacts people's skill bases, how that impacts people's employability. So the more those get shut down in this year and maybe next year, then in 2 years and 3 years' time, I do think we're going to feel that. But there are certainly opportunities that have popped up during this time, which I don't think is all bad news. And the organizations that I'm involved in have certainly found ways to to survive online, to replace some of those missing human connections. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Matt. And Natalie, it'd be fantastic if you could introduce yourself and also talk a little bit about your perspective on how people can be resilient to the changes that are occurring in education just now and due to coronavirus. And we were just talking about Brexit as well and the impact that's going to have on young people too. So it'd be fantastic to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Sure, thanks very much. And it's lovely to be with you. And when I talk to students and young people, I feel like there's a place where I've always got to start, which is actually, an apology. From my generation, and I'm 54, to the younger generations now, I have to say, I'm sorry, we've made a right mess of the world. And what we've all got to do is get together and work to fix it. And the education system and the failures of the education system are a very big part of that. And when we look at the impact of COVID, as in so many other areas like poverty and inequality and hunger and food security, COVID is exposing pre-existing issues. It's the fragility, the lack of resilience of our existing systems that left us open to the impacts of COVID. A more resilient system would be far more able to stand up to the inevitable zoonoses that are going to come from our destruction, environmental destruction on the planet. But I think if we look at the sort of underlying problem is certainly in the UK and in most of the global north, we look at university education, indeed certainly in the UK in school education, the whole thing has been built on idea of competition, of universities being a bit like widget factories. They're all competing against each other and the strong end up selling lots and lots of widgets, attracting lots and lots of students, and the weak fall by the wayside. But that ignores the fact, of course, that every student is there needing an education, receiving an education, the impact on their life of how their institution is regarded will have an impact right through their lives. And so what we should be doing is, rather than the idea of being competing businesses, universities actually should be, as they once were regarded as, communities of scholars looking to improve the world for everybody. And when we think about learning, universities have very much been thought as the place you went to after school, and that was a certain period of your life, and then you went out into the world. But we've got to really resurrect and encourage and support the whole idea of lifelong learning. And that learning now, the world is changing so fast. We'll have to change so fast with our environmental and social crises that I get very, very angry when I see the British government talking about, judging universities, having them compete against each other on the basis of graduate salaries and how employable it makes people. What universities should be doing is preparing people to learn, to be flexible, to be good citizens, to be involved in their communities. Those are not narrow vocational things. I mean, obviously you need brain surgeons and engineers with some very technical specific skills, but many people going to university won't be doing those sorts of courses. And the idea that their courses should prepare them for a job, which, with something like COVID, lots of jobs have literally disappeared overnight. In a world like that, university has to be doing what it traditionally did, which is improving the world for everybody and educating everybody. And I think we should be seeing many more people going to university, not less than has generally been seen. And I think all of our education systems, both universities and particularly in Britain schools, there's a great piece in The Guardian today from the artist Grayson Perry talking about how, you know, through COVID, and COVID has given us opportunities to see things in new ways. And lots of people have got involved in artistic, creative, doing things for themselves, in part from necessity. And, you know, he's saying, let's not lose that. We actually need education, you know, in schools. In Britain, we've seen a narrowing, teaching to the exam, teaching to the test, focus on the key subjects, drop drama and arts and literature and all, and you know, anything that's not very narrowly focused. You know, we need to prepare people to have a good, fulfilling, decent life, and arts creativity has to be part of it. And, you know, interestingly, even, you know, if you look at this in a conservative Tory British perspective, you know, that's also where lots of the jobs, lots of the increase in economic value lies, is in those creative kind of areas. And I just, one final thought that I'll finish on, which is the kind of jobs that we're going to need in the future, the kind of world we need to have. We really need to see a world in which people are equipped to go out and not having been hammered to be a square peg, to go into a square hole, you know, to follow the directions, to follow the rules. We need people who can look around and say, right, I can see this is wrong with the world. I want to fix it. You know, go to someone who's got some resources, who's a boss of a company or something. And that boss should not say, right, I want you to go and do this, this, and this. It should say, okay, what can you contribute? How do you want to change things? How do you want to make things differently? And I'll finish with a little anecdote. I used to work on the Times newspaper in London many years ago, and you know, it was a very, very male-dominated place. The news desk, as such places traditionally and to a large degree, I think, still are. And at one point, a middle-aged male, they had the above the fold, they had a golfing story. So they wanted something for the ladies, and, you know, they were trying to appeal to young women. And so they had an article about Monica Lewinsky's beauty secrets. And several young women tried to suggest to these male middle-aged editors that that possibly, you know, wasn't something that was really appealing to the audience they were looking for, and got swept aside. And Monica Lewinsky's beauty secrets, I would say, utterly failed to sell copies of the Times newspaper.
Thanks so much, Natalie. It's, I think you raised a really good point as well, which about, even though we're in these negative times right now, there are actually new opportunities, and if you know where to look for them. You mentioned a few there. I'd love to put it to the other two as well to see, you know, what opportunities they've identified and that young people could be trying to take advantage of at the moment. So, Matt, over to you about opportunities that you see that young people could take advantage of.
For sure, thank you. I think personally, there's a tension of I want to say my generation, but increasingly I'm getting slightly too old to maybe call it that. But for now, my generation of you know, historic connectivity versus, you know, tech-driven isolation. So, you know, there's a deep kind of contradiction there of, you know, we're constantly connected, but, you know, others, you know, how rich are those connections? In COVID, I think the world has had to grapple with that entirely. And young people, you know, we're moving to being on our phones with our friends to just being on our phones by ourselves with our pot plants. So there's certainly, you know, we are well placed as young people to be at the forefront of this COVID world in terms of those new opportunities. We know what the online space is like, and I think in terms of, you know, startups that I heard was talked about earlier, like young people really get this space well, and as the world turns its attention to that, I think young people really do have the opportunity to capitalize on that. You know, if they're given the opportunities to do so. So in terms of young people connecting, there's certainly opportunities there. And then I think there's another side of things, which is that time prioritization has shifted dramatically during this lockdown. In Australia, I don't know, we've had a particular experience. I'm sure it's different around the world. But there's definitely been a shift in where time priorities are. And it speaks a little bit to what Natalie was saying about getting away from just thinking about our times in terms of economic decisions and moving much more towards decisions about where else that time could be invested in. And I do think, I'm not entirely sure if the world's going to catch on to that idea, hook, line, and sinker, but I think there has been a wake-up call, certainly in terms of where that time could in fact be invested. And my encouragement to all young people everywhere is to make sure that if possible, and volunteering certainly is a privilege, but if there is time, then there are always opportunities to invest that in places. If you're willing to do it without pay, there are always places to invest your time that I think benefit not just yourself and those around you. So I suppose those would be my sort of two concepts that I introduced in response to that question of we are well placed as young people to take advantage of increased attention in online spaces and online connectivity, and the tensions that are involved there. And then there are so many opportunities for us to use our time better than a minimum wage job. And if governments can allow for that, then there is unboundable potential in terms of where that could lead to.
Thanks, Matt. And Alexandra, what opportunities do you think are out there?
I mean, from just a personal perspective, working, with the 3 million, but in the migrant and the refugee sector more broadly, I think actually this pandemic, there has been a massive hit on resources in the sector that made a lot of work more difficult. But on the other hand, there has been more space, I think, to think about organizing and how we approach organizing, especially on migrant rights, and to reflect on the way forward, especially in the next, I don't know how many years of this current government. So I think in a way, people working in certain sectors are always very rushed. There's such a thing as activist burnout, and what this pandemic really slowed a bit the thinking on this and actually made us reflect on some more strategic decisions, which is always positive. In terms of organizing as well, I started the Young Europeans Network in the 3 million digital place for young people to discuss issues around democratic participation, youth, citizenship, migration, settlement scheme, and all those issues during the pandemic, because I thought, well, if I can't go in the communities and meet with young people, young migrants, and listen to them, what else can I do? So we have, weekly Zoom meetings now. We have a Discord platform where people can chat about different topics, and we have other kind of ways that people can connect in the digital space. In terms of, I hope, that's me being a bit optimistic, when the narrative shifted a bit on migration very early on in the pandemic, when we were clapping for key workers, including key workers of migrants background, I thought this is the moment to really change immigration policy in the UK. I'm not so certain, after the last 2 weeks of coverage, quite terrible coverage about so-called again migrant crisis, but I still think that the vast majority of people resident in the UK really start seeing migrants of whatever nationality they are more as part of communities, our local level communities, rather than commodities we have to measure in terms of skill-based or a points-based tick box. And I really think the public opinion would shift a little bit, at least to put some pressure in the next few years. Now, what I would like to see is this solidarity that we do in, for example, when we have COVID mutual aid groups or support volunteer groups in the community, that solidarity we feel there, with everyone, regardless of whether they're Romanian like myself or, from the States or from another country. I would like to see that reflected in the policies, because sound bites won't help migrants, but what will actually help is policy change.
That's really great, Alexandra. And just a couple of points from my side to reiterate some of the things I said earlier. In terms of opportunities, I think on the one hand, you have people being able to seek work experience whenever they, by volunteering, by helping out. They don't just have to work geographically anymore. Because of remote work and because we're all quarantining, that gives you an opportunity to work with an organization anywhere in the world effectively, and to gain valuable experiences and useful skills, which you can then take into, whether it's your future career or your future degree. And also, one thing that always comes to mind in this period is, so I come from a startup background myself, and in startups, everybody talks about disruption and this idea that these young new companies can disrupt an industry and make it better, bring new products that make everyone's lives better. And right now we're going through a period of global disruption where, potentially everything's changing, and there is real opportunity to, as Alexandra was saying, have help with things like migration or help with things like the environment. And I'm personally hopeful that we can come out the other side of this with a better perspective on these issues. But my next question is related to what Alexandra sort of closed out her statement with just then, which is, what can our institutions be doing to ensure that young people can come out of this more resilient, can survive through this, and potentially even be better for having gone through this ordeal, this process. And perhaps let's start with you, Natalie, on that question.
Yes, certainly. And I have to preface all of this by saying there's not much sign of the current British government doing this, but let's look on the hopeful, positive side and think about what's possible and think about what some other governments around the world might do. And that is that what we have to do is free up people from stress, from worry, from fear. If pre-COVID, huge numbers of people, and particularly young people, were scrambling together 2 or 3 0-hours contract jobs, perhaps their own little hustle, little company on the side, struggling to pay the rent each week, struggling to put food on the table. And if you're doing that, there's very little headspace for changing the world. And so what really is a responsibility on all governments is to give people security, that basic sense of things are okay for me personally, so I can look around and see how I can really make things better, which I'm leading up to, obviously, the idea of universal basic income. And one of the things we've seen through this crisis, particularly in the UK, for example, is the government has thrown an enormous amount of money into the community through furlough schemes by which people are paid even though they're not working for companies, payments and loans to small independent businesses, freelancers, etc. But there were huge numbers of people who've fallen through the cracks on those things. They didn't meet the conditions, and that whole idea of conditionality of most people will accept the human right to live, but we don't actually guarantee that people can eat, and eating is a kind of basic prerequisite for living. And so if you give people that cushion of security, then people can go out and do these things. But if you've just really hard scrabble trying to survive, it's very hard to find the extra space to do things creatively. And that's really damaging to the whole of society. I mean, I say a universal basic income society, I will admit that you'll probably get lots of really bad poetry written in it, because lots of people will decide their vocation in life is to be a poet. But most people, if no one wants to listen to their poetry after a couple of years, will decide to go and do something else. But you'll also get some wonderful poetry written that wouldn't be written while that person now is stuck in a call centre, in a horrible call centre, commuting 2 hours a day to it because they can't afford any room anywhere closer, having a thoroughly miserable life, and draining away their creativity. And the other thing, I'll just sort of following on from what was said about migration and migrants, we're also potentially at an enormous changing point, which we're just starting to see some discussion of. I think the British government, we have the hideous hostile environment, we have dreadful rhetoric, and we have Trumpian or sub-Trumpian approach to politics. But we're also seeing the world shifting, whereby birth rates have fallen off a cliff, and COVID is having even bigger impact on that. And countries like Spain, for example, at current trends, their population will have halved. The total population will have halved by the end of the century. And so we're heading into a period quite soon where people, and particularly young people, will actually be very rare. We have aging societies. And so it's not hard to imagine a society, as I used to live in Southeast Asia, and a couple of centuries ago there, kings used to kidnap whole peoples because it was so hard to keep people alive and you just wanted more people. We're potentially heading to a world where, we actually have to value every individual, and that, potentially really can change the way things operate. We're really heading into a different world in a very positive kind of way.
Thanks, Natalie. And that makes me think of a point Alexandra made earlier as well, which is, we're also seeing smart, talented people exiting Britain at this time because of Brexit, and because of, also remote working means they can go and work abroad and still work for a company in the UK. And that's also, a cause of young people leaving and an imbalance in the population. I don't know if you've got anything you'd like to add to that, Alexandra.
No, I think in the autumn we saw, like in the quarter of ONS, of Office for National Statistics, EU migration was at its lowest than, comparatively to levels before EU accession, so like in 2003. And I mean, that's partly explained by Brexit, of course, and how EU citizens, some of them feel because of this process and some of the uncertainties around their rights. I mean, even some people feeling, having quite mixed feelings about the EU settlement scheme and the fact they have to apply to stay in the country they call home. But on the other hand, I think also, especially countries in Eastern Europe. I mean, as I said, I'm from Romania. I think a lot of the industries have developed there. So, for example, a lot of my friends who are software engineers in the UK have moved to Romania because they realized they actually would have a better standard of living, especially as young people, because the rent costs less. I mean, you get like a salary that's a bit less, but the rent costs less. The food is better quality, even on the cheaper end. So, like here, if you are on minimum wage, the quality of food you get is not as good as in, this is a bit in Romania. So even if you're on minimum wage in Romania, you still have, in a way, some better aspects of your life. And I think for young people, that is, that is an important thing, to actually have like a quality of life, not only earn necessarily a high wage. I would say, one final point I will make on this, on the issue of young people. I think when we speak about this issue, I think I can't really dissociate this idea of rights, the rights we have in the UK or any other country, with the idea of representation. Personally, I'm a campaigner for the right to vote for all residents in all local elections. And I think, that is like the idea that, we need rights and representation at the same time. And also in terms of youth projects and projects on young people, I would like to see more in the third sector as well, projects that are led by young people, from the design stage, from the stage to get a grant for something, have young people there on the boards deciding this, to the actual implementation and dissemination of the project, because often young people feel that they're spoken about in the politics, rather than actually being an integral part of the decision-making process. Many of us can't even vote, and many of us are not really taken seriously. So I think we need to kind of an attitude shift on that as well.
Thanks, Alexandra. And Matt, what could institutions be doing to build in more resilience with young people in these times?
Sure. I definitely want to echo what Alexandra just finished on there, in terms of institutions really taking young people quite seriously as contributors and partners wherever they may be, and whether that is an organization taking a young person on at a board capacity. And we talk about diversity on boards, and so rarely do we see someone under the age of 40 being on a board of anything. And the organization I'm involved in, we are a youth-run charity, and everyone is under the age of 25. So I'm chair of the board of this $1 million organization, and we seem to be fine. Young people have the capacity, the capabilities of really contributing and adding a lot to. And I think it's in business's interest. I think it's in organizations' interest to engage with young people, for the same reason that we fought this. Or we're still fighting this in terms of engaging with women and having women on boards and having cultural diversity on boards. Exactly the same sort of things there. And, bigger institutions, like, it still boggles my mind that we consider 17-year-olds not eligible for voting, when, those are the people who are about to spend the most amount of time dealing with whatever the repercussions are of what's happening in political processes. So if young people could certainly be taken more seriously by all sorts of institutions, and brought on, I think that would not just benefit those institutions, but also really get to young people being much more resilient in those spaces, caring much more about those processes, caring much more about those things, and really being invested in. I think also the second point, and this was raised as well, about the flexibility that COVID has inspired. Working from home was raised a lot here, or working from Romania, and the capacity for people to really have lifestyles that suit them rather than lifestyles that suit their workplace, I think is a phenomenal lesson that we could really take to heart. Even things as small as universities finally allowing for people not necessarily having to attend on-campus things in order to pass their degrees, I think is a ginormous step forward for a number of my friends, never mind, the thousands of other young people for whom getting to campus for whatever reason is incredibly difficult. And they've been campaigning about this for years. And suddenly now that there's a global pandemic, who knew that's all that it would take? But that fight has been proven to have been very easy to shift, actually, the requirements for these institutions to engage with a diverse group of people who are engaging with it. So I think that, as we've shown through COVID, we can actually be very flexible in all of our processes. We've had to be incredibly flexible, and a number of people have really benefited from that, and it would be such a shame for that not to continue into the future, and for us not to build on that as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. And just to close things out, it'd be great to just go around, and if everybody could give one piece of advice to someone who's under the age of 25, who's very uncertain about their future and either want to make change in their institutions or just make change for themselves and their communities, what would that be? And I'll kick us off. I think for me, these are trying times right now, but there's also an amazing opportunity for disruption. This is these are the kind of time periods where you can actually do even a small change can have a massive impact. And with everyone remote and with everyone, people not necessarily working or finding it difficult to be using their time doing things they would normally be doing, like education and working, you also have an opportunity to get a lot of people on board and to work alongside you. And I've seen that happening since the start of the pandemic. I'm one of those people who took an opportunity, and those opportunities are available to you as well. So I'd encourage you to go out there and build something and do something and organize a group of people. Let's go to Matt.
Good question. I've so many things I'd like to say to young people. I think to borrow from Nike would be to just do it, whatever it may be. And my biggest tip there would be to tell people that you're doing it. I in high school, at the end of high school, I decided that sex education in my school was taught terribly. And for whatever reason, 17-year-old Matt or 18-year-old Matt went around telling people that I was going to fix it. And by the time I graduated, the peer pressure I'd created for myself to actually go and do that was enough for me to go on and invest the time to do something. So certainly my number one tip would be talk to people about changes that need to be made. Chances are most people you speak to will nod their head enthusiastically, will offer you tips, will make connections for you, will join you on your team, and they'll ask you about it next week. And it's a great way to hold yourself accountable.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. How about yourself, Alexandra?
I would say, especially if you're campaigning on migrant rights or any social justice related issue, be persistent as a young person. So do write to your local elected representatives. If you don't get the answer the first time, insist. If you go to your local party meeting, for example, and no one takes you into account, go again and insist. Don't give up, because at the end of the day, if you keep on insisting on your issue, you can create change within your local organization or within the local party or within whatever organization that you are part of. And often it takes more than one try, and it's what I learned from experience. When I started joining different meetings, I was the only person raising EU migrants' rights issues in certain local levels. But if you insist, if you keep on writing, keep on holding people to account, keep on retweeting the Home Office with some comments on Twitter, like I do, then you will get some influence, even as even if you're not an expert on immigration, or even if you're just a young person who wants to be involved in change that benefits you and your community. So I'll just say insist and complain also if necessary.
Fantastic. And finally, over to you, Natalie.
Well, just following on from that, one of the things that I say when I go into schools, colleges and universities is, my top line message is make politics what you do, not have done to you. And Alexandra is a wonderful example of that, in terms of people often say, well, what does that mean? And what that means is yourself and getting together with others, working with others to change things around you. If that's in a school, I've been in primary schools and said to them, what do you want to change? And the class in front of me can usually come up with half a dozen things about the school they'd all like to change. And it's like, well, pick one of those and go away and start with that. And I'm often asked, how do you get into politics? And you can certainly go and study politics or whatever, but the best way really to prepare yourself for politics is by doing politics, getting together with others and doing that. And I think, I'll stress the with others bit, because I actually had a very good question. And it's always interesting when I've been in politics a long while and you get the same question again and again, but when someone asks you a new question, and it was a 10-year-old in a school in North Yorkshire, I was talking about this, and she put her hand up and said, "Oh, when you were our age, did you do politics?" And I had to sort of really think about that and say, no, I didn't. And why didn't I? And it's actually because no one really had, this is pre-social media days and everything, of course, and no one had ever really suggested to me that anyone else thought the way that I did, or that it was that you couldn't just do things on your own. So I went through all my teen years, raging about various things. I mean, it's interesting what you said about sex education. We had the most horrendous lecture from our male headmaster, which basically drew graphs on the board and said, well, men's arousal looks like that and women are like that, so that's why women shouldn't wear low-cut blouses because then they'll get raped. And it was the most horrendous thing. But I went back and raged very loudly in a place where all the teachers could hear me, but I had no idea of how to get together with others and organise. And that's really crucial. And I think perhaps to finish on a message of hope is the way things are now, COVID has only highlighted the fact that they're profoundly unstable. The status quo will not continue as things are. And that's really good news, because we've created a right mess of economic, environmental, social chaos, suffering, mental health epidemic. This is now a great time to be a young person, because you can get together with, like-minded people from all generations and build something far better than what we've left to you.
Brilliant. I think it's a fantastic note to end on as well. I want to say thank you to all of our speakers, and also give them the opportunity to share any Twitter handles or websites that they'd encourage you to visit and follow. So let's start with you, Natalie.
I use all of them, but Twitter's my favourite, @NatalieBen. So it's NATALIEBEN. And I generally respond, and if you want me to retweet something that looks good, I'll probably do that. And if I don't respond the first time, sometimes the volume overwhelms me, so have another go.
Great. And Matt?
For a young person, I'm a real Luddite when it comes to social media. But if you're interested in youth organizations, if you're interested in sex education, Two Birds One Bee is my sex ed project, and UNIT Australia, if you contact them, you can certainly get a hold of me. And if you're thinking about young people getting together to form an organization and do interesting things, we are more than happy to help support that and chat through things.
Brilliant. Alexandra?
Yeah, so the organization is the 3 million. So on Twitter is @the3million, and 3 is not 3, it's just the number 3. So the 3 number million. My personal one is Alexandra with an X, BULAT. So Alexandra Bulat on Twitter, but that is kind of content about me ranting about the Home Office. So it's a personal feed, not an organization feed. So if you want the organization @the3 million, and also have a separate page for Young Europeans, so it's the3million.org.uk/Young Europeans.
Fantastic. And for me personally, my personal Twitter account is Mark C. Sloan, and that's Mark with a C. So MARCCSLOAN. And if you're interested in volunteering opportunities, applying some of your skills, come to covidtechsupport.com. And we'll happily find a place where you can get some work experience. You can upskill and meet others who are also in the same boat as you. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to everyone who's listened to this. It's been a real fantastic hour, and yeah, I hope you all managed to learn something and get something from this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.